Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, one of those gray, listless days where the sky can't decide whether to rain or just hang heavy with the thought of it. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea and staring out at the damp garden, leaves plastered to the patio like forgotten bits of wrapping paper. The caller ID was unfamiliar, a local number I didn't recognize. Usually, I let those go to voicemail, assuming it's another robocall promising to lower my non-existent mortgage rates. But something made me pick it up. Maybe boredom, maybe a flicker of something else. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding a little rusty. There was a pause, a soft clearing of a throat on the other end. "Sarah, is that you?" The voice was male, deep, with a warm timbre that felt vaguely familiar, like a half-remembered song. "Yes, speaking," I replied, cautious. "Who is this?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Sarah, it's David Miller, Mark's uncle." My breath hitched. Mark, my ex. We hadn't spoken in. Well, it had to be close to 15 years. And his uncle? I'd met David maybe twice, briefly at awkward family gatherings during the 3 years Mark and I were together. He'd been quiet, kind-eyed, overshadowed by Mark's more boisterous family. Why on earth would he be calling me now? My mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened to Mark? Was there some family emergency? David? I managed, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Wow. Hello. It's been a very long time." "It has, hasn't it?" He sounded almost hesitant. "I hope this isn't. I hope I'm not intruding." "No, not at all," I lied slightly, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Just unexpected." "Is everything okay?" "Oh yes, everyone's fine, as far as I know," he said quickly. "Nothing like that. I apologize if I worried you." I could almost picture him, that slightly formal way of speaking I vaguely recalled. He was older than Mark, maybe 10 years or so, which would put him, well, into his late 50s or early 60s now, I supposed. Closer to my own age than Mark ever was. "No, it's okay," I said, genuinely relieved. "So, what can I do for you, David?" The question hung in the air. Why call after all this time? He cleared his throat again. "Well, this might sound a little strange, Sarah. I was sorting through some old boxes. My sister, Mark's mother, asked me to clear out some things from her attic, and I came across a photograph." He paused. "It was from that barbecue they had, remember? The summer before. Well, before Mark and I imploded in a rather spectacular fashion, he meant. I did remember that barbecue. A hot, sticky day, the smell of charcoal and citronella candles, forced smiles and polite conversation. David had been there, manning the grill, occasionally offering a quiet comment that got lost in the general noise. "I think I remember," I said slowly. "There was a photo," he continued, his voice softening, "of you. You were sitting under that big oak tree in their backyard, reading a book. You looked so peaceful. Content." I blinked, surprised he'd noticed, let alone remembered. I barely remembered it myself. Reading had always been my escape hatch at those events. And he went on, a touch of awkwardness returning, "Well, would you perhaps consider meeting for a coffee sometime? Just to catch up properly? As old acquaintances?" My immediate instinct was to decline politely. It felt complicated. The connection, however tenuous, was through Mark. What would people think? What would Mark think, if he even knew? But then, why should I care? Mark was ancient history. And David, there was something in his voice, a loneliness perhaps, that resonated with a quiet corner of my own heart. He wasn't asking for anything dramatic, just coffee. An hour out of my life. What harm could it do? And curiosity, that persistent human itch, was definitely playing a part. Why now? Why me? Coffee, I echoed, looking out at the gray afternoon that suddenly didn't feel quite so listless. You know, David, I think I'd like that. The following Saturday found me sitting in a booth at the Daily Grind, a local coffee shop known for its decent brew and relative anonymity. I'd arrived 10 minutes early, a nervous habit I'd never quite shaken. Butterflies, or perhaps small, agitated moths, fluttered in my stomach. What was I doing, meeting my ex-boyfriend's uncle? It felt like breaking some unspoken rule, even 15 years later. I smoothed down my sweater for the third time and took a sip of water, scanning the entrance. I wasn't even sure I'd recognize David immediately. My memory painted him as tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes behind glasses, but time changes people. What if he looked completely different? What if *I* looked completely different to him? The photograph he'd mentioned captured me in my late 20s. Now, firmly in my mid-40s, the landscape of my face had certainly seen some weathering. Just as I was starting to seriously reconsider my decision, the bell above the door chimed, and a man stepped inside, pausing to scan the room. It was him. The hair was more silver than dark now, especially at the temples, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, but they were undeniably the same kind eyes I remembered, still behind glasses. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a subtle assurance that hadn't been as apparent years ago. He spotted me, and a slight, almost tentative smile touched his lips. He walked over to the booth. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice just as warm as it had been on the phone. "David." I smiled back, relieved. "Please, sit down." He slid into the opposite side of the booth, placing a worn leather briefcase on the seat beside him. He wore a simple collared shirt and trousers, nothing flashy, but neat. There was an air of thoughtful respectability about him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," he said, his gaze direct but gentle. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I was curious," I admitted honestly. "It's not every day you get a call out of the blue like that." The waitress arrived, and we ordered a black coffee for him, a latte for me. The brief interruption eased the initial awkwardness. Once she left, he leaned forward slightly. "I hope it wasn't too strange, my calling." The photo it struck me. How different things were then. They certainly were, I agreed. We skirted around the obvious topic, Mark, for a few minutes, talking instead about the town, how it had changed, the ridiculous price of property, the usual safe topics. But the elephant, or rather the ghost of my ex, was definitely in the room. Finally, David addressed it, albeit indirectly. "You know, Sarah," he began, stirring his coffee slowly, "I was always sorry about how things ended between you and Mark. It seemed unnecessarily messy." I appreciated his acknowledgement. Mark's family had firmly closed ranks back then, and I'd felt very much like the villain, regardless of the actual complexities. "It was a long time ago," I said, trying to sound philosophical. "We were young." "We were," he agreed. "But still, you always struck me as having a good head on your shoulders, level-headed." I laughed softly. "I'm not sure Mark would agree with that assessment." David smiled, a genuine, warm expression that lit up his eyes. "Mark and I often have different assessments of things. He's my nephew. I love him. But we're very different people." That admission surprised me, I'd always assumed a united family front. Hearing David acknowledge their differences made him seem more individual, less like just Mark's uncle. We talked more easily after that. He told me about his career in structural engineering, about the projects he'd worked on, his quiet pride in buildings that would long outlast him. He spoke of his late wife, Eleanor, who had passed away nearly 5 years ago after a long illness. He didn't dwell on sadness, but spoke of her with a deep, abiding affection that touched me. He described the quietness of his house now, the adjustment to living alone after decades of partnership. He wasn't complaining, just stating a fact, but I understood the echo of silence he described. I talked about my work at the library, the satisfaction of connecting people with books, the quiet rhythm of my days. I spoke a little about my own life since Mark, a couple of relationships that hadn't lasted, friendships that had, the contentment I generally found in my independence, though admitting, like him, that quiet evenings could sometimes stretch a bit too long. What struck me most was how easy it was to talk to him. There were no pretenses, no games. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own experiences with a quiet openness. The connection I felt wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was substantial. A meeting of minds, perhaps. A recognition of shared sensibilities despite the unusual circumstances of our reacquaintance. He wasn't just Mark's uncle. He was David, a man with his own history, his own perspective, his own quiet charm. The hour we'd implicitly allotted stretched into 2. As we got ready to leave, standing outside the coffee shop on the sidewalk, there was a moment of slight hesitation. What now? I really enjoyed this, Sarah, David said, meeting my eyes. Much more than I even expected. Me too, David, I replied sincerely. It was surprisingly nice. He smiled again. Perhaps, if you're not busy, we could do it again sometime. Maybe dinner. My internal alarm bells, the ones conditioned by years of caution, pinged faintly. Dinner felt like a step up from coffee. But then I looked at him, at the kind eyes, the silvering hair, the gentle way he stood there, not pushing, just asking. And I thought, why not? What was I so afraid of? I'd like that, I said. I really would. The surprise and pleasure that flickered across his face were genuine and oddly warming on that cool afternoon. Dinner happened the following week. David suggested a quiet Italian place on the edge of town, dimly lit, with checkered tablecloths and the comforting smell of garlic and baking bread. It felt different from the bright, public space of the coffee shop, more intimate, more intentional. My nerves were back, but they felt less like anxiety, and more like a curious sort of anticipation. What was this connection we were forming? It defied easy labels. He wasn't just an old acquaintance, not anymore. But what was he? He was waiting for me at a corner table when I arrived, rising politely as I approached. He looked distinguished, wearing a sport coat over a button-down shirt. He'd clearly made an effort, and I found myself glad I'd chosen my favorite silk blouse. "You look lovely, Sarah," he said, his compliment straightforward and sincere, without any hint of practiced flattery. "Thank you, David. So do you." We settled in, ordered wine, and picked up the conversation almost exactly where we'd left off. It was remarkable how easily we talked. We discovered shared interests, a love for old black and white films, a surprising fondness for the same obscure folk singer, a mutual appreciation for quiet walks in nature. He told me about his tentative plans to visit the national parks out west, something he and Eleanor had always talked about but never managed. I shared my own half-formed dream of taking a sabbatical to volunteer at a library in a small town in Ireland. These weren't just polite exchanges. It felt like we were sharing parts of ourselves, testing the waters, finding common ground. He asked me more about my life, not just the highlights but the textures, the challenges of dealing with library budget cuts, the small joys of finding the perfect book for a struggling reader, the quiet satisfaction of tending my small garden. He listened with genuine interest, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to offer solutions unless asked, just listened. It was a rare gift. I found myself opening up more than I usually did, talking about the lingering loneliness that sometimes crept in, the feeling of being slightly adrift now that my career was established, and the path ahead seemed less defined. He understood. He spoke about his own transition into retirement, the loss of daily structure, the need to find new purpose. "It's strange," he mused, swirling the red wine in his glass. "You spend decades building a life, a career, a family, and then the structure changes. You have to find new ways to fill the space, not just the time, but the emotional space." His words resonated deeply. We weren't trying to fix each other's problems, just acknowledging them, creating a space where those vulnerabilities could exist without judgment. During a lull in the conversation, he reached across the small table and briefly covered my hand with his. It wasn't a possessive gesture, or even necessarily a romantic one. It felt more like emphasis, connection, understanding. His hand was warm, his touch gentle but firm. I didn't pull away. The contact sent a surprising jolt through me, a warmth that spread beyond just my hand. It felt right, comfortable, unexpectedly so. He withdrew his hand after a moment, a slight flush rising on his cheeks, as if surprised by his own action. "Sorry," he murmured. "No, don't be," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "It's okay." That small moment shifted something. The air felt charged, not with awkwardness, but with a different kind of awareness. The ex's uncle label felt increasingly irrelevant, almost absurd. This was David, a man I was enjoying getting to know, a man I felt a growing, complex connection with. As we were finishing our meal, he hesitated, then said, "Sarah, there's something I probably should have mentioned earlier. About Mark." My stomach tightened slightly. Here it comes, I thought. "Mark knows I contacted you," David said quietly. "He knows we met for coffee and that we're having dinner tonight." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and how did he take that?" David sighed softly. "Well, Mark is Mark." He was surprised, maybe a little confused. Asked why I'd want to dredge up the past. David met my eyes. I told him it wasn't about dredging anything up. I told him I came across your photo, remembered you fondly as a sensible, kind person, and was curious how you were. I told him it had absolutely nothing to do with him or your past relationship. He paused, and I told him, quite frankly, that who I choose to have coffee or dinner with is my own business. A small smile played on my lips. I could just picture Mark's reaction. But I also felt a surge of respect for David, for his honesty and his clear boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, David," I said. "And thank you for, well, for handling it that way." "It's the truth," he said simply. "My reconnecting with you has nothing to do with him. It has to do with you." And perhaps, he added, a touch self-consciously, with me realizing that life's too short not to reach out to people who made a positive impression, however long ago. His honesty was disarming. It cleared the air, removing the last lingering shadow of my past relationship from our present interaction. It allowed me to see him purely as David, and perhaps for him to see me purely as Sarah. The rest of the evening flowed easily, filled with laughter and shared stories. When he walked me to my car, the cool night air felt refreshing. There was no expectation, no pressure. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Sarah," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Thank you, David. I had a really lovely time." He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Would it be all right if I call you again?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'd like that very much." He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, David." As I drove home, the streetlights blurring past, I felt a sense of quiet wonder. This connection, born from such an unlikely circumstance, felt more real, more grounded than anything I'd experienced in a long time. It wasn't about passion or whirlwind romance. It was about understanding, respect, and the quiet joy of finding a kindred spirit in the most unexpected of places. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. David and I saw each other regularly, maybe once or twice a week. Sometimes it was dinner, sometimes just a walk in the park on a Sunday afternoon, or meeting for coffee. We talked on the phone too, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. It felt easy, natural. The initial awkwardness surrounding the Mark connection had faded almost completely, replaced by the simple reality of our growing friendship, or perhaps something more than friendship, though neither of us rushed to define it. One Saturday, he invited me over to his house for lunch. It was the first time I'd seen where he lived. It was a modest but well-kept older home on a quiet, tree-lined street, the kind of place that felt solid and established. Inside, it was neat, comfortable, filled with books, dark wood furniture, and framed photographs, landscapes, architectural drawings, and poignant pictures of him and Eleanor, younger, smiling. It didn't feel like a shrine, but like a home that held cherished memories. He'd made sandwiches and a simple salad. We ate at a small table in his sunny breakfast nook, overlooking a surprisingly beautiful backyard garden. He pointed out the different plants, telling me which ones Eleanor had planted, which ones he was trying, somewhat unsuccessfully, to keep thriving. "She had the green thumb," he admitted with a wry smile. "I mostly just try not to kill things." I laughed. "My approach is similar. Benign neglect, I call it." He showed me the photograph that had started it all. It was tucked into an old album, slightly faded. There I was, younger, my hair longer, absorbed in a paperback under that big oak tree. Seeing it felt strange, like looking at a different person. "You really did look peaceful," David said softly, standing beside me, looking at the photo over my shoulder. It was a rare moment, I confessed. Those family gatherings weren't always my favorite place to be. "Mine either, sometimes," he admitted quietly. We stood there for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the ghost of my younger self, connected by this shared, slightly uncomfortable memory. But instead of feeling awkward, it felt intimate. A shared acknowledgement of the past, viewed from the safety of the present. As I was leaving later that afternoon, standing by the front door, he reached out, not for my hand this time, but gently touched my arm. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "I just want you to know how much I value this. Our time together. It's become very important to me." My heart did a little flip. His honesty was always so direct, so devoid of games. "It's important to me too, David," I replied, meeting his gaze. The air between us felt thick with unspoken possibilities. He leaned in slightly, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. Part of me wanted him to. But he hesitated, then just squeezed my arm gently before stepping back. "Drive safe," he said. I understood his hesitation. This wasn't something to be rushed. The connection we were building felt precious, delicate even, despite its underlying strength. It was based on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Pushing it too fast, trying to force it into a conventional romantic box, might break it. As I drove away, I reflected on how much I'd changed, how much this unexpected connection had already taught me. Years ago, I might have craved the drama, the passionate declaration. Now, this slow, quiet unfolding felt infinitely more meaningful. It wasn't just about finding companionship. It was about being seen, truly seen, by someone who appreciated me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. David saw the quiet librarian, the woman who preferred books to boisterous crowds, the person who found solace in gardens and old movies. And he didn't just accept those parts of me. He seemed to genuinely like them. He wasn't trying to change me, any more than I was trying to change him. We were two people in the middle chapters of our lives, carrying our histories, our losses, and our hopes, who had found an unexpected harbor in each other. The climax wasn't a grand event, but a quiet realization that settled over me during a walk a week later. We were ambling along a path by the river, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the companionable silence, the sound of crunching leaves underfoot. And I realized, with a clarity that was both startling and peaceful, that I was completely happy. Not ecstatically, head over heels happy, but deeply, contentedly happy. Happy to be walking beside this kind, intelligent, gentle man. Happy to have found this unexpected connection that nourished my soul. It didn't matter